3 a.m., the Strait of Hormuz, 12 miles off the coast of Qeshm Island. Imagine spending $32 million on an advanced aerial surveillance platform only to watch a single interceptor send it spiraling into the sea. That is exactly how this morning begins. An Iranian Khordad-3 defense system launches a high-speed interceptor toward an MQ-9 Reaper drone. Moments later, the drone's wing gives way, and one of the Navy's most valuable eyes in the sky disappears beneath the dark water. But the encounter is far from over. 20 miles away, a United States Navy F/A-18 Super Hornet is conducting a solo patrol. The instant the drone vanishes from radar, a second Iranian Sayad-2 interceptor leaves its launcher and begins tracking the heat from the aircraft's engines. Should it close to within 150 feet, its 440-pound fragmentation payload could disable the jet almost instantly. The pilot reacts without hesitation, forcing the aircraft into a punishing 9G maneuver. At the same time, the onboard ALQ-214 electronic warfare system floods the incoming interceptor with disruptive signals. The guidance system loses its target, and the interceptor detonates safely about half a mile away. Then something happens that appears to make no sense. Instead of pressing forward, the United States Navy turns around. The entire carrier strike group receives orders to move back 150 miles. From the Iranian commander's perspective, this probably looks like a major victory. But while the fleet creates distance, something much more important is happening behind the scenes. The Iranian military is working around the clock on what it calls a super bunker, buried deep inside the limestone cliffs of Qeshm Island. Satellite images appear to show dozens of Fateh 110 ballistic systems being transported into underground tunnels. The restored radar network may be the most concerning part. A conventional radar sends out energy, waits for that signal to reflect from an aircraft, and then measures the return. A passive radar operates differently. It does not need to broadcast a powerful signal of its own. Instead, it monitors civilian radio and television transmissions, looking for subtle changes caused by aircraft moving through them. That makes the system far more difficult to locate. Rather than calling for a pause, the United States decides to respond. The order reaches the USS Philippine Sea, a guided missile cruiser. 6 BGM-109. Tomahawk cruise missiles rise from the ship and race toward the main entrance of the Qeshm Island bunker. Then comes the first major surprise. As the Tomahawks cross the 12-mile boundary into Iranian territory, a concealed targeting radar activates for exactly 4 seconds. That brief window is enough to transmit final targeting data to the defensive interceptors. 4 Iranian Sayad-3 missiles launch almost immediately. Their guidance is remarkably precise. 4 bright explosions appear over the water as 4 Tomahawks are intercepted. The remaining 2 continue toward the cliffside entrance. Both reach their target and detonate against the reinforced limestone structure. When the smoke clears, however, the bunker appears almost completely untouched. From beyond the horizon, a destroyer launches 2 SM-6 interceptors. The ship cannot directly see the distant targets because they are hidden beyond the curvature of the Earth. Instead, the interceptors receive guidance through a digital data link connected to a P-8 Poseidon aircraft and Skydio drones operating from the tanker. The destroyer is effectively engaging targets identified by other platforms, relying on a seamless electronic handoff. Then another threat approaches the formation. The USS Gravely, a multi-billion-dollar destroyer assigned to protect the cruiser, immediately launches an SM-2 interceptor. The first NOR missile is stopped 3 miles from the ship. The second, however, behaves very differently. Its seeker performs an unpredictable corkscrew maneuver, disrupting the ship's primary radar picture for a fraction of a second. That brief disruption is enough to force the Gravely into its final layer of close-range defense. 2 miles from the ship, the crew releases a wide cloud of chaff, millions of tiny aluminum strips designed to create the radar image of a false vessel. The decoy works exactly as planned, drawing the incoming missile's sensor away from the real hull. Then the Phalanx close-in defense system takes over, stopping the NOR missile just 400 yards from the ship. The detonation is so close that the pressure wave sends coffee mugs trembling across the tables inside the operations room, but the vessel remains secure. Then comes an order that leaves military observers searching for an explanation. All units are instructed to withdraw to Holding Point Alpha. The carrier strike group turns its enormous ships away from the area and moves 150 miles back. From the outside, it looks like a complete retreat. Inside the Iranian command centers, officials likely believe they have forced the fleet to withdraw. But the United States is not leaving the operation. The Navy is clearing the area so its surveillance platforms can study the electronic environment without interference from the powerful transmitters aboard its own ships. While the fleet increases its distance, a single P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft circles 50 miles away. Its crew activates an advanced electronic intelligence suite and begins examining every signal moving through the air. That is when they detect something unusual. The signal is coming from a neutral Panama-flagged oil tanker called the Blue Star. The tanker is sitting motionless in the water, yet its antennas are transmitting dense streams of military-grade encrypted data. Suddenly, the entire situation begins to make sense. The United States allowed Iran to construct its supposedly impenetrable mountain facility because analysts suspected the bunker might be a distraction. They were waiting for Iran to relocate the system's real command center, the advanced computers, communications equipment, and senior personnel. Iran had apparently placed those critical assets aboard a civilian tanker, assuming the United States would focus entirely on the heavily protected mountain complex. Hundreds of millions of dollars may have been spent creating a convincing underground fortress, only for one American surveillance aircraft to detect the real system from 50 miles away. The Navy decides to test the discovery. Another MQ-9 Reaper drone is sent toward the tanker. It is valuable equipment, but the Navy needs to determine whether the restored defense network has truly been moved offshore. As the drone approaches within 5 miles of the Blue Star, the first major surprise of the operation unfolds. The mountain bunker, supposedly filled with defensive missiles, remains completely silent. No radar activation, no launch, no response at all. Instead, a concealed section of the Blue Star's deck slides open like the roof of a luxury vehicle. An Iranian Sayed-2 missile launches directly from the tanker. Within moments, the MQ-9 disappears from the surveillance network before it can even begin an evasive turn. The Navy loses another drone, but it receives the confirmation it was looking for. The mountain facility was not the true center of the restored system. It was an elaborate decoy. Iran had transformed a neutral oil tanker into a mobile, floating air defense platform. The United States Navy immediately enters a complete electronic blackout. Then, emerging from the silence, 4 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters descend to just 15 feet above the surface of the water. Flying at 140 miles per hour, the Seahawks race toward the Blue Star while remaining low enough to reduce their radar visibility. As the helicopters pass behind the tanker, they release a swarm of Skydio X-2D microdrones. These autonomous scouting platforms weigh less than a laptop, yet they can navigate with remarkable precision. Guided by artificial intelligence, the drones approach the Blue Star's large satellite communication domes. They do not attempt to break into the ship's software. Instead, they hover only inches from the antennas and activate high-gain electronic injectors. The micro-drones begin flooding the tanker's receivers with a repeating data loop. The signal imitates the exact electronic interference the ship's own systems would generate during a critical hardware malfunction. In seconds, the Blue Star's communications network begins receiving signals that make it appear as though its own equipment is failing from the inside. It is like placing a megaphone beside someone's ear and playing a recording of their own security alarm at full volume. Using the microdrone's high-definition thermal sensors, the United States finally gets a clear view inside the tanker's cargo hold. Hidden below deck are 20 Fager-110 ballistic missiles mounted on hydraulic launch rails. Capable of traveling at nearly 3,000 miles per hour, these weapons were intended to pose a serious threat to the American fleet. But when the technicians aboard the tanker see their displays freeze and warning lights spread across the control panels, confusion quickly takes over. The injected signal makes their diagnostic systems report that the United States has somehow crossed the tanker's isolated security network. To the crew, it appears that an outside force may be preparing to activate the missiles remotely or extract the vessel's entire intelligence archive. The Iranian command center on the coast now faces a harsh but calculated decision. Rather than risk losing control of the technology, commanders decide to disable their own mobile base before the United States can take advantage of it. 2 Nor anti-ship missiles launch from positions hidden along the cliffs of Keshem Island, and their target is the Blue Star itself. But the American fleet, waiting 150 miles away, was never truly retreating. The USS gravely detects the coastal launch signatures almost immediately. Because the P-8 Poseidon is already monitoring the tanker, the fleet does not need to wait for the incoming missiles to appear on the ship's own radar. The aircraft provides an early warning, giving the destroyer valuable extra time to respond. From beyond the horizon, the Gravely launches 2 SM-6 interceptors. The destroyer cannot directly see the targets over the curvature of the Earth. Instead, the SM-6 missiles receive continuous guidance through a data link connected to the P-8 Poseidon and the Skydio drones positioned around the tanker. It is a fully digital handoff, allowing one platform to detect the threat while another carries out the interception. The SM-6 interceptors reach the Nor missiles just 500 yards from the Blue Star. The resulting blasts are powerful enough to break several windows on the tanker's bridge, but the vessel remains afloat. More importantly, the information being transmitted by the micro-drones continues flowing back to the fleet. The United States allowed Iran to rebuild what appeared to be a highly protected system, then applied just enough pressure to force its operators into revealing how that system worked. Now the tanker is isolated, its defensive network is disrupted, and the Navy has nearly everything it needs for the final phase of the operation. The Skydio X-2D microdrones hovering around the Blue Star complete their electronic intelligence collection. They transmit the tanker's internal communications, defensive layout, and the precise position of every missile back to the fleet. Then the drones take on a new role. Each one directs its high-resolution camera toward an exposed missile hatch and activates a coded laser marker that cannot be seen with the unaided eye. 3 miles away, the sensors aboard the MH-60R Seahawk helicopters detect those signals. The helicopters launch a group of AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, each one following the laser guidance provided by the micro-drones hovering above the tanker. The Hellfire missiles descend through the tanker's open hatches and strike the exposed Fateh-110 ballistic missiles stored inside. These are solid fuel rockets, which means that once the propellant ignites, stopping the reaction is extremely difficult. Each missile contains what is essentially a 30-foot-long section of highly energetic solid material. When the Hellfire warheads activate inside the enclosed steel cargo hold, the conditions aboard the tanker change instantly. The rocket propellant ignites almost simultaneously. In a matter of seconds, the Blue Star is no longer functioning as a vessel. It becomes the center of an enormous chain reaction. The force tears through the tanker's 1,000-foot steel hull, breaking apart entire sections of the ship. The restored command vehicles, missile control equipment, and specialized personnel aboard the tanker are completely removed from the operation. But the mission is not over. While the Blue Star continues burning offshore, the Navy turns its attention back to the so-called super bunker on the coast. The carrier group's withdrawal to a position 150 miles away had never been a true retreat. The ships were creating a quieter electronic environment, allowing satellites and the P-8 Poseidon to produce a highly detailed synthetic aperture radar map of the mountain. That was the real reason the United States had waited. During the ceasefire, surveillance platforms observed Iran moving thousands of tons of concrete, steel, and equipment into the facility. By combining high-resolution imaging with subsurface sensor data, analysts were able to identify the bunker's most vulnerable structural points. They located the limestone pillars and reinforced arches, supporting the immense weight of the cliff above the underground complex. Now, the F-35 Lightning II aircraft arrive. The jets release a group of GBU-31B precision penetrator bombs, each programmed to strike one of the calculated weak points. The weapons hit the 3 key limestone supports holding the underground structure in place. Once those supports fail, gravity takes over. The weight of the mountain collapses into the facility, disabling the restored drone laboratories, command rooms, and missile storage areas beneath layers of rock and debris. The United States had allowed Iran to complete the restoration because a finished bunker is no longer a flexible construction site. It is a rigid structure whose entire stability depends on a limited number of carefully engineered supports. Iran invested $500 million, creating what appeared to be an untouchable fortress. But by completing it, they also revealed exactly where the structure was most vulnerable. And before this operation ends, there is one detail about the MH-60R Seahawk that is often overlooked. Most people focus on its torpedoes and anti-ship weapons, but one of its most effective systems is the ALQ-S-2-1-0 electronic support suite. Its sensors are sensitive enough to detect extremely faint electronic emissions, including the signal produced by an insufficiently shielded laptop several miles away, even when that device is operating behind a steel hull. Iranian commanders believed they were hidden because their equipment was positioned beneath 6 inches of steel aboard a neutral vessel. To the Seahawk's sensors, however, every active computer, transmitter, and control panel stood out against the quiet electronic background. The Navy was not waiting for a signal to begin the operation. It was waiting for the Iranian crews to switch on their equipment. Long before the first missile entered the air, the fleet had already detected the electronic heartbeat of the entire network.